What's up guys, JV2017 here. Today I'd like to talk with you all more about Evolve because Turtle Rock Studios, the developer behind the game, released an infographic today of all of the data they collected during the open beta event, which I believe was either last weekend or 2 weekends ago. But anyways, we have a lot of information here and I kind of want to talk about what this data means and how it may affect the game that comes out in 2 weeks on February 10th. So I know it's probably already gold, the game's already gone gold, which means they're printing discs. They can't make a bunch of changes, but they can still release a day one patch and do some tuning. So that's really why I want to talk about the game. I also want to talk about it because I think Evolve will be a fantastic game for 2015. Probably the best one, so far because we're really early into the year, but still I think it'll be one of the best games of 2015. I've already played a bunch of the beta. I just love the game. So I just want to talk about it more with you guys. If you have no idea what this infographic is, I'm going to link it in the description below so you can join this conversation. And always guys, be active in those comments. I like seeing what you guys have to say and I mostly respond to you guys if you have something interesting to say. So anyways, let's get to it. So the first bit of information they have for us is the percentage of games won by either the monster or the hunters. So 51.5% of all games played during the open beta were won by the hunters. So that means the 4 players beat the 1 player, the 1 monster. 4 hunters beat 1 monster. And then, of course, 48.5% of the time, the rest of the time, the monster won. So the 1 monster player beat the 4 hunters. And I think this really illustrates, the relationship depending on which, team you're on. If you're on the team of hunters, you have to rely on your teammates. You can't just be an assault and take down, the monster all by yourself. You have to rely on your teammates. If you're a really good hunter, you could get paired with bad hunters and they could bring you down. You could lose the game because of that. But it's that kind of relationship that you have with your teammates that you'll have to deal with when you are playing a hunter. However, if you're playing a monster, you only have yourself to rely on. You are, the only determining factor to whether you win the game or not. Either you're better than the hunters collectively, or you're not. So it's really interesting to see that the hunters have a little bit of an edge, but what's really impressive to me is that they're almost at 50%. Half of the games almost were won by hunters and half of the games by monsters. So they were 1.5% off. I think that is really awesome, really impressive considering the fact that this is asymmetrical. Once again, it's 4v1. So the teams aren't evenly matched, but they've got such a balance here with everything that they have going on with the game that they've almost got 50%. Half of the games are won by monsters, half of the games are won by hunters. That is really impressive, and I think it really speaks to how much testing was done before the beta was out, before we got our hands on it early. And it makes me even more excited because they've got all this balance going on, and I really can't wait to see how it turns out in the real game. Next up, they have the average match time. What was the average, game that was played? How long did it last in the beta? And it's 9.91 minutes. So that makes a lot of sense because I don't know if you guys knew this, but there's basically a 20-minute non-combat time limit. So when you're not fighting the monster, the game counts how much time you're taking, how much time has allotted in the match that you're in. So if you're not in combat for 20 minutes, the game is over. It ends. I'm not even sure what happens because it didn't happen to me during the beta, but it makes a lot of sense for this number, but to be between 0 and 20, pretty much right in the middle at 10 minutes. Of course, some games are over really quickly because you have a bad monster, or the monster is good, but they messed up and so they got killed early, or the monster just jumped the hunters and killed them very quickly. I've had that maybe happen to me once during the beta, but not very often. And of course, some games are really long. I've had a 23-minute game because we've had 3 minutes of combat time and then 20 minutes of non-combat time. And it's pretty much a cat and mouse game when it gets, to that long of a game. But how will this affect the actual game, knowing that the average match is between 0 and 20? I think that's exactly where they want to be. That's pretty on point, to have the average match between 0 and 20, the time limit, and between the games when the game started at 0. So anyways, I don't think that's going to affect a lot, but it's interesting to know that pretty much, 10 minutes is the average match time. The next bit of information they share is the damage by class ranking. So ranked from 1 to 4, which class deals the most damage to which class deals the least amount of damage to the monster. And number 1 is what we can expect. It's the assault class. They're the damage dealers. They're supposed to be number 1, so there's really no surprise there. However, the second, rank 2 on the 1 to 4 is not surprising, but interesting to me. It's the support class. So this is why this is interesting to me. So obviously, every class has their role. The assault is supposed to deal the most damage, and they do. So we know that for sure because of this info. And then the tracker is supposed to track down and trap the monster. That is their role. Every trapper has an orbital, shield or, cage or whatever you want to call it. And so that makes sense. That's their role. The medic is supposed to keep everyone alive. They're supposed to heal everyone. That makes sense. But the support is kind of the wild card. But the support is also responsible for the second most damage. And that's really what I'm trying to, illustrate here. The support is a wild card kind of class. It doesn't have a specific goal other than to support the teammates. However, a big part of that support is also dealing damage. So that's what I really wanted to reveal for you guys. Support is the second most important class for taking down the monster, for dealing that damage. And that's really interesting to me. I love the support class. It was actually my favorite in the beta. But Trapper makes sense. Trapper is third. So third most damage dealing is Trapper because, of course, Trapper has a lot of abilities to trap the monster. Not surprising. But the Trapper always has like one weapon, to deal some damage. And also some Trappers have weapons to track the monster. It makes sense. But they don't deal a lot of damage. And then, of course, fourth is the medic. They deal the least amount of damage. They just do, and that also kind of makes sense as well. So how will this affect the game? Probably not a lot from a development standpoint, because they probably already knew this. But I think for players, now we know where the damage comes from. It's primarily from assault, but then secondly, it's the support, which is very cool to know. The next bit of information we have is pretty much related to the last bit, and it's the top 5 damage dealers according to character. So we know the characters and we know the class, and let's just get into it. So the number 1 highest damage dealing character in the game is Parnell. Parnell is the 3rd assault character, so you only got to play him in the beta if you pre-order the game. So I got to play as him because I pre-ordered the game. And it makes sense, of course, that an assault would be the highest damage dealing, but we now know that Parnell deals the absolute most amount of damage in the game to monsters, period. According to the beta build, that's how it is. So unless they have a day 1 patch that kind of tweaks things, and I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but it's interesting to know that Parnell, that's it. He's number 1. He is the number 1 damage dealing. So that'll probably, if you have a Parnell in your party and you're a medic, you probably want to keep Parnell alive, especially if he's a good Parnell, or he or she, because he deals the most amount of damage in the game to the monsters. So now we know that. Second is Markov. Markov, of course, is the first assault character available. Everyone got to play him in the beta. He was pretty good. He was pretty solid, and we know that he deals the second most amount of damage in the game. Third is Hyde. So Hyde is the second assault character, and everyone got to play him if you unlocked him. And I don't know what else to say other than he's the worst of the assault characters, but he's still the 3rd most damage dealing character in the game. So you're pretty good if you have a Hyde. He just can't deal as much damage as a Parnell. And it could be that Parnell is easier to use, easier to deal damage with. Same with Markov. Those 2 characters may be easier to deal damage with than Hyde, but the fact remains that the highest potential for damage clearly is Parnell, regardless of player skill. So 4th on the list, we get into the support characters. So if you notice, those first three characters were assault. That makes sense based on the last amount of, the last piece of data that we talked about. So 4th is Bucket. So I think Bucket is up there, number 1, because his rocket launcher probably deals a lot of damage if you get it on the monster. In fact, I know it does. Secondly, you can find the monster a lot easier with Bucket. So Bucket probably deals more damage overall because he can kind of almost track the monster with his UAV, which is very useful. I use it every time I use Bucket. And then third, the sentries are really powerful. If you have a stage 3 monster that's attacking the power relay and you lay down sentries around it, that is going to shred through that monster. And so I think that's why Bucket is way up there. 5th is Cabo or Cabot, and I think the reason he's up there, you guys can tell I'm playing this gameplay with Cabot or Cabo. I don't know if you guys knew that. He's got the rail cannon, which can shoot through rocks, and of course you can dust tag the monster and, track it and very easily shoot the monster that way. And so Cabo, I think it kind of makes sense there, and that means Hank is the least effective at dealing damage of all of them, but Hank has a lot of defensive support abilities. So I think Hank has a place himself, but there it is. In terms of dealing damage, we know the top 5 characters. So how will this really affect the game? I think there will be a little bit of tuning, but it seems pretty good where it is. You know, of course, if there's 3 assault characters, there's going to be a highest damage dealing assault, and then a second and a third. So someone has to be first, second, and third with all the characters. So, but it's still interesting to know that the highest amount of potential damage is Parnell. The last bit of info we have is about monsters, and this is pretty much just a lot of general information and some tips as well. So they could measure from the open beta that the Goliath dealt the most amount of damage out of the 3 monsters in the early game. So that means Goliaths have the highest chance to take down the Hunters early out of the Kraken and the Wraith out of all monsters. And they also have this little tip that says watch out for Flame Breath, which I agree with. Flame Breath can really, you know, knock you out of the game. So, you know, Goliath, if you're really good early game Goliath, that is where you want to be. You want to be using the Goliath to take down the Hunters early game. Next up is the Kraken. The Kraken is basically the Mario of the monsters, all around good at everything. So the damage is evenly spread, so you're not going to deal a ton more damage in the later game than in the early game, but it says to take your time to whittle down the Kraken. That's their little tip for fighting the Kraken, which makes sense. It makes sense because it's not going to deal more damage later, at least it didn't in the beta, so you might as well just take a crack at the Kraken. Ha! Every time you see it. That was terrible. So that's a little information we got from the Kraken. And then finally, the Wraith. The Wraith dealt the most amount of damage in the 3rd stage. And I know you guys probably already knew that, but the Wraith is a bastard when it's in the 3rd stage. It's very hard to take down. I've only heard of 1 Wraith takedown in the 3rd stage, in fact, by one of my friends. So what they have about the Wraith is that it's evasive in the beginning and deadly at the end, which I think is a very clear indicator of, hey, we need some balancing here with the Wraith, because every time I fight a Wraith, I feel like I'm at a disadvantage when I'm a Hunter. It'd be interesting to see what the Hunters versus Wraith game percentages are, because I'm betting that it's 75% Monster, 25 Hunter. Or maybe even more obscene than that. I think there needs to be some tuning with the Wraith. It shouldn't be both evasive in the beginning and really awesome and deals a lot of damage at the end. It should be an opposite thing. It should be really I don't know. I'm not a game developer. I'm not gonna make any, like, oh, they should do this specifically. But it's interesting, and I think it'll, a lot of people complain about the Wraith. I think there'll be some day 1 patch tuning for the Wraith. So anyways, guys, I talked a lot in this video because I love the game, and I want to know what you guys think as well. So remember to leave some stuff in the comments below, some questions, some ideas, and we can bounce them off of each other and have a nice conversation about Evolve. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Also, subscribe for more Evolve commentaries like this, talking about the game, talking about strategies. And of course, when the game comes out, I'm going to hit the ground running with a bunch of Evolve content. I can't wait. So hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace!